what we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive.
Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching The World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines this hour. A magnitude 7.6 offshore earthquake prompts Japan to issue a tsunami warning, up to 3 meters for Hokkaido, Aomori and Iwate. The quake struck 80 kilometers off Aomori at 11:15 p.m, shaking much of the country's north and east. President Trump will meet Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House on December the 29th to discuss the second phase of the Gaza ceasefire and regional peace options. Israel says talks will cover future steps, including a possible international stabilization force. French President Emmanuel Macron says talks with Ukraine's Zelensky in London aim to secure convergence between US, European and Ukrainian positions on a possible peace deal. Macron says aligning all three sides is the main issue in advancing negotiations. Thailand launches airstrikes on Cambodian positions after a Thai soldier is killed, with Cambodia reporting 4 civilians dead and thousands fleeing the border areas. Both sides trade blame for the heaviest clashes since July's ceasefire, as Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar warns the violence could unravel regional stability. Paramount launches a $108.4 billion all-cash offer for Warner Bros. Discovery, calling Netflix's earlier bid inferior and uncertain. The $30 per share tender represents a 139% premium, as Paramount says WBD shareholders deserve a superior option. EU countries back a major tightening of migration rules, including plans for return hubs for failed asylum seekers outside the bloc. Interior ministers in Brussels approved the Commission's proposals amid rising public pressure, with the package now headed to the European Parliament. Syrians celebrate the first anniversary of Bashar al-Assad's overthrow with events in Damascus's Umayyad Square and military parades nationwide, even as the country struggles to recover from years of war. Celebrations come amid ongoing instability and a fractured landscape, 1 year after Assad fled to Russia. Sudan's rapid support forces say they have captured the Heglig oil region on the southern border, calling it a pivotal gain in their war with the army. A military source confirms troops withdrew to avoid damage to oil facilities as the power struggle intensifies. Now for our top story this hour, we start in East Asia, and Japan issued tsunami warnings on Monday night after a powerful 7.6 magnitude earthquake struck off the country's northeastern coast, raising fears of waves as high as 3 meters along the Pacific shoreline. The Japan Meteorological Agency says the quake hit at around 11:15 p.m. local time, jolting wide areas of northern and eastern Japan. According to national broadcaster NHK, the first tsunami waves were expected to reach port areas between Aomori and Iwate by 11:40 p.m. local time. Authorities warned residents in coastal regions to stay alert and move to higher ground where advised. The tsunami alert covered parts of Hokkaido, Aomori and Iwate, with officials cautioning that sea levels could fluctuate for several hours. The quake's epicenter was located about 80 kilometers offshore from Aomori at a depth of roughly 50 kilometers, the agency said. Japan's emergency services were closely monitoring the situation, with assessments ongoing to determine possible damage along the coast. Okay, we're now joined by Naresh Wadia, a seismologist. Thank you very much, Naresh, for joining us here on the programme. What, of course, is triggering in regards to Japanese earthquakes is the history. 3 meters of a wave, 3 meters height of a wave. How serious could that be if it does hit a built-up area, for example?
Yes, this is just as a major earthquake, 7.6 earthquake is there, and there is a history of the earthquake. That is, means if you can see the 2011, that 9.1 magnitude earthquake, but that was a major earthquake in this city. And as it is occurred in the shallow depth beneath the sea, so there is a chance of tsunami there. And as it is expected, the sea meter or something is there, so nearby the coastal region, there are the chances of just as the tsunami occurrence, and there may be some causes of effect of the tsunamis are there. So this is there, and we have seen that 9.1 earthquake, and this earthquake is also in the rupture zone of that 9.1 earthquake, although the epicenter is toward the north of that earthquake is there, so there might be the chances of the tsunamis somewhere in the coastal region.
Basically, this quake is meant to hit the the prefectures by 11:40 p.m. local time. How could this develop, and what will the public be thinking now? What is the most safest option for the Japanese people in those areas?
Yes, that is the precaution, is that if there are tsunamis are there, then it should be away from the coastal areas, as we have seen in the earlier history also. So the precaution must be, and as there is now the tsunami warning systems are so strong, even Japan and the other part of the world, they are, so there must be the precaution has been given to the public, and the precaution is must be away from the coastal area. That is the main just as the precautions just we have to take there in case of the tsunami is there. So that is the case, and it takes time. The tsunami, now the prediction is possible for the tsunami, and it gives a time of half hour or 2-3 hours before the tsunami hit to the coastal region. So that must be just the precaution must have been taken by the people according to the Japanese tsunami warning system and other warning system. The alert and has been given.
Thank you very much, Naresh Wadia, for joining us here on NewsX World. It's a pleasure to talk to you here on the programme. We now move over to Europe, and in London, European leaders gathered at Downing Street for high-stakes talks with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. During the meeting, Zelensky reaffirmed that unity among Europe, the United States and Ukraine is essential for meaningful progress in negotiations. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer reiterated that any ceasefire must be just and lasting, stressing that decisions about Ukraine must be made by Ukraine. French President Emmanuel Macron said that Europe has a lot of cards in its hands, noting Ukrainian resistance and increasing pressure on Russia's economy. He added that the main issue now is finding convergence between the United States, European and Ukrainian positions. On the other hand, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz voiced skepticism over elements of the US peace plan, but emphasized the need for dialogue, saying that is why we are here. These developments come as, on the ground, Russia's defense ministry claims its forces have taken control of Novodanilivka in the Zaporozhye region and Chervon in Donetsk. As leaders push for alignment, the situation on the ground continues to shift. We're now joined by John Rossomando. He is the president of Viking Research Associates and a geopolitical analyst. He joins us live from Washington in the United States.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, John. These talks going on in London, at the forefront, Macron, also Zelensky is saying it's hard now finding common ground between the United States, of course, over in Washington, and European leaders and Zelensky over in London today. What are your thoughts on this divided Western Front?
Well, I'm just seeing that there's no way to reconcile the European and Ukrainian position that Ukraine cannot give up territory. The Russians have pretty much maintained that they will continue the war, as long as it takes. They don't care how many Russians they kill to accomplish this. And then you have Trump saying that the Ukrainians should give up the areas that the Russians have conquered in order to end the war. So, you can't square a circle here.
John, critics would say, does that plan have longevity? If Vladimir Putin's Russia can invade a country and then rewarded at the end of it with the territory that it has occupied, does that have a longevity, and does that not give Putin the due diligence to possibly go in for more?
Well, the thing is that the Europeans were caught unprepared for the Russian invasion. They thought that everything ended with the end of the Cold War. So I think that they will be more prepared in case the Russians plan to expand their military offensives. I mean, Poland is talking about restoring conscription and is building the biggest military in Europe. The Germans are rearming. All of Europe is in the process of rearming. And one thing that we saw in the invasion of Ukraine was that Russian logistics were terrible. So I think that we can see the Europeans building deterrence against the Russians.
And of course, territorial integrity. Keir Starmer and Friedrich Merz, the German Chancellor, both said no decisions on Ukraine without Ukraine. Is that decision completely off the table now?
Well, I think that right now the Ukrainians and the Russians have no common ground, because the Ukrainians want all their territory back. The Russians say no. So, I mean, this war could go on for a very long time, and I don't see, say, China leaning in on the Russians to end their aggression while they're engaging their own in East Asia. And the Europeans are intent on backstopping against Ukraine.
John Rossomando, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. It's a pleasure to have you on the programme. We now move on to some more American foreign policy next, and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will meet US President Donald Trump on December the 29th to discuss the next steps in the Gaza ceasefire, an Israeli government spokesperson has confirmed today. The talks are expected to focus on advancing the second phase of a US framework aimed at ending the war in Gaza. Netanyahu said earlier that discussions with Trump would cover unresolved issues under the ceasefire plan, which came into effect in October following intense fighting between Israel and Hamas. Since then, both sides have repeatedly accused each other of breaching the truce, highlighting its fragile nature. Key points yet to be agreed include the disarmament of Hamas, the future governance of Gaza once the war ends, and the composition on and mandate of an international stabilization force in the territory. According to the Israeli government, these issues are central to whether the ceasefire can progress beyond its current phase. Israel's Prime Minister's office said Trump formally invited Netanyahu to the White House earlier this month, although Israeli media reports suggest the meeting could also take place in Florida. We're now joined by David K. Johnston. He is an American author and he joins us live from New York. Thank you very much, David, for joining us here on NewsX World. Of course, phase one has been fragile to say the least. December the 29th, still a relatively long way away. As things stand, and statements, of course, made by the Qatari Prime Minister that the current ceasefire is at a breaking point. What do you think could come out of this meeting?
Well, I think Netanyahu's game here is to continue to be able to pursue his goal of removing Palestinians from Gaza or radically diminishing their influence and their numbers there. In a way, he's following the same playbook as Vladimir Putin, who keeps talking because it allows him to continue his war of attrition. And while we call this a ceasefire, we've seen repeated incidents where the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, have killed various Palestinians, a number of those killings under what seem to be very dubious circumstances. So Netanyahu, first and foremost, wants just more time to pursue his goal of pushing away as far from Israel as he can and reducing in numbers Muslims generally, but especially Palestinians.
And what are your thoughts about the relationship between the two? There have been rumors of spats, of course, between the Israeli Prime Minister and the American President. But in the end, on a public face, the two seem to remain to be very friendly. Is this meeting about Gaza policy or about restoring their political partnership?
It's about shoring up that relationship. You know, I've spent many, many hours with Donald and negotiated with him many times as a journalist. And one of the lessons that you learn is that you have to keep flattering him. You can easily manipulate him. So long as you flatter him, you figure out what he wants to hear, and you find a way to sugarcoat what he doesn't want to hear or to eliminate it from the conversation. So Netanyahu is basically managing Trump, who is generally going to be supportive of whatever Netanyahu wants to do. But Donald also believes that everyone else is inferior to him, and they need to treat him as this special person who's the only one who should run things.
Okay, David, do stay with us for our next story as we move on. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa says ideas of white racial superiority are a threat to the country's post-apartheid unity, its sovereignty and its diplomatic relations while speaking at a conference. Ramaphosa said some in society still adhere to the notions of racial superiority and racial privilege, views he says align with wider notions of white supremacy and white victimhood fed by false claims about persecution of white Afrikaners. He pointed to recent comments by US President Donald Trump, who boycotted the G20 summit in Johannesburg and claimed without evidence that South Africa mistreats its white minority. Though widely debunked, the idea of a genocide has circulated in far-right and white supremacist chat rooms for years. Ramaphosa said these false claims have real implications for sovereignty, international relations and national security, and said a campaign needs to be launched globally to address them. He added that South Africa continues negotiations with the United States on trade while also accelerating diversification of export markets. David joins us once again. President Ramaphosa here is warning against these supremacist narratives, including, of course, Donald Trump's recent claims, which he did in front of press cameras in the White House, and that they're harming South Africa's sovereignty. How serious should we take Trump's statements in regarding wider global, shaping global disinformation?
Oh, I think this is an incredibly serious development. Thursday night, with no announcement, the U.S. State Department put out its annual assessment document about world affairs. And it is a blatantly white supremacist, might makes right document. It goes after South Africa in particular. Now, South Africa is a very troubled country. It's had unemployment above 20% for the last 35 years, and it's now at about 33%. The country is not doing well economically. But the notion that this is because it has black leadership alone is a ridiculous argument, but it's Trump's argument. Trump is trying to shut off immigration from almost everywhere in the world, with one notable exception. he's opened the doors and provided money for Afrikaners, white South African farmers, and a few of them have come to the United States at the expense of the United States taxpayers. But if you or I were President Ramaphosa, I think that we would be very alarmed by this State Department report, because it is explicitly racist and white supremacist, and is getting an enormous amount of attention here in the US from people who are kind of shocked at how open the racist views of Donald Trump, which go back many decades, for which he's in formal judicial proceedings been held liable and had to pay damages. How much this, I'm sure, is weighing on the president of South Africa. I think it's weighing on him very substantially.
Yeah, and David, of course, South Africa hosted the G20 this year, and Trump and the United States, Donald Trump's administration, they boycotted it. From a diplomatic standpoint, how is that interpreted by capitals worldwide? And do you think this could set a trend due to the, given the rise of populist governments right now?
Well, I think we're seeing a realigning of world powers. The new State Department document is basically going back to the old great powers theory that we got rid of at the end of World War II. And it is aligning the United States with dictatorial regimes and racist regimes. And that means that the Europeans, the Japanese, the Australians, hopefully the Indians, East Indians, are going to be in a different direction about this. But this is a very troubling development, and unfortunately to a large segment of Americans who are, as Donald Trump likes to say, the poorly educated, this is not going to be well understood in terms of its geopolitical consequences. The other important thing, Thomas, to keep in mind is Donald, you know, I've known almost for 40 years, is just appallingly ignorant. He operates from his underlying belief system, and one of his core underlying belief systems is black people are stupid, they shouldn't be in leadership positions, they're not to be trusted. He uses disgusting terms to describe African countries. And it's just the nature of who he is and who he has been his entire life, and who his father was before him.
David K. Johnson, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you for taking the time. We now move on to the African continent once again, and Congolese President Felix Tshisekedi has accused Rwanda of violating its commitments just days after both countries signed new US brokered agreements in Washington aimed at ending years of conflict in eastern Congo. Tshisekedi stressed that Rwanda is failing to honour the terms of those deals. Renewed tensions came as deadly clashes continue on the ground, and according to reports, the Rwanda-backed M23 rebels, who deny receiving Rwandan support, seized the village of Luvungi over the weekend. Congolese troops reportedly fled to the nearby town of Sange, where they clashed with local Wazalengo Defense Forces. Local authorities say Sange was hit by explosives, killing up to 36 people, including civilians and children. Neither the Congolese army nor M23 has commented on the incident. The violence threatens fragile progress made under recent US and Qatar mediated agreements. Let's listen in.
Malgré notre bonne foi et l'accord récemment entériné, force est de constater que le Rwanda viole déjà ses engagements. Au lendemain même de la signature des unités des forces de défense du Rwanda, ont conduit et appuyé des attaques à l'arme lourde tirées depuis la ville rwandaise de Bugarama, provoquant de lourds dégâts humains et matériels, notamment dans les localités de Kaziba, Katogota et Lubarika au sud Kivu, rompant ainsi le cessez-le-feu.
Now we move on to the entertainment world, and nominations for the Golden Globe Awards 2026 are in, with Frankenstein, Hamnet and Sinners nominated for Best Dramatic Film, one battle after another, starring Leonardo DiCaprio with nominations in 9 categories in film. Meanwhile, British TV drama Adolescence continues its sweep with nods for Stephen Graham, Owen Cooper, Eric Doherty and Ashley Walters. Other programmes shortlisted for awards are fan favourites The White Lotus, Severance and Slow Horses, plus Abbott Elementary, Hacks and The Bear. This year's edition features 28 categories, including a newly introduced annual honour for Best Podcast, marking the Globe's continued expansion into emerging storytelling formats. The 83rd Golden Globes will take place on Sunday, January the 11th, 2026, with comedian Nikki Glaser returning as hosts after her successful stint in 2025. That's all that we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.